Hello, this is Gail Kohn. I am bringing to you some really interesting people today with the important initiative that is in the same office with our Thrive by 5. AgeFriendly is an initiative that's in the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services offices, intended to change DC into an easier city in which to grow older. All of us are growing older, including those who are just born. So this is an important session to talk about housing for preschoolers and children who are growing older, living with elders. And this is an opportunity to hear from speakers who really know what's going on. Donna Butts is going to lead off. She's the president and CEO of Generations United. And she will discuss national affordable intergenerational housing opportunities, including DC's Plaza West, and affordable residence reserved for elders raising children, including some who are 5 or younger. Elin Zurbrigg will speak after her. Elin is the Deputy Director of MiCasa here in DC. She will describe Genesis, an affordable residence in Northwest for moms leaving the foster care system for apartments in a building with half the units reserved for older adults, committed to helping young neighbors and their families. I want to tell you a little bit about AgeFriendly DC before we go on. This is a World Health Organization initiative that has caught fire across the world, and in particular in the United States. We work together both nationally as well as internationally to share ideas about where we're headed. Each of us, however, start with what's going on in our own jurisdiction. Elin, would you advance the slide? In DC, we found that in addition to the social determinants of health that the World Health Organization guided us toward, we had other issues that the residents wanted us to focus on. But all of us throughout the world are focused on the built environment, outdoor spaces, transportation, and housing. And then changing attitudes about growing older also includes World Health Organization focuses social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, and communication and information. It's in the lifelong health and security area where DC residents pointed out stuff that they wanted us to be involved with that wasn't part of the World Health Organization focus. Community support and health services was there, but not emergency preparedness and resilience, and we've all been through our dose of that with COVID-19. Then financial security is another domain where our residents in DC were concerned about whether they had enough money to make it through their lives. Public safety, our concern here expressed by the DC residents was whether they could go out any time of the day or night and feel safe. Lifelong learning is very important to all of us. We need to keep on learning throughout our lives, and we've all had a good dose of learning about technology in the last several months. And finally, caregiving, which is a really important and growing issue for us in DC, including what we're going to be talking about today. So advance the slide one more time. And I think at this point we can take this slide deck off and go to Donna Butts's slides. These are the people who are leading the age-friendly effort. Our best partner is the Center for Aging and Humanities at George Washington University, but the initiative is run by the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, with Raina Smith leading it.
Well, good morning. And Gail, thank you very much for this opportunity to share a little bit about young children, and older adults living together and sharing programs together as well. It's a joy to be here with you and with Elin. But first, I wanted to share a little bit about Generations United with you. Generations United was founded about 30 years ago. It was founded at a time when people were trying to pit the generations against each other, saying you could either support our youngest or our oldest members, but not both. And our founders came together and said, no, we can and should support our bookend generations, our generations that hold civil society together, our youngest and our oldest. And as one of our founders said, we formed Generations United to argue for a caring society. And we continue to play that role today by supporting the social compact, that give and take between generations, knowing that across our life course, we do give, we do take, and we share. And really, it also has to do with the fact that it's great to have younger and older people together, because older people know stuff you don't know, and younger people know stuff that you don't know. Intergenerational programs have historically been based on the direction of service. There are cases where older adults are serving younger people, and probably an example of that you may be most familiar with are tutoring programs, mentoring programs, things like that. There are also programs where younger people are serving older people, and I think a couple of good examples of that are teaching technology, capturing oral history, stories that would be lost if they weren't captured. And then there are times when older and younger are serving together. And that can be in the arts and humanities, where there might be an intergenerational orchestra or theater group. It can be in working together, a high school student with an older adult teaching at a grade school or elementary school child. But it's older and younger working together. Oftentimes it's in a community dialogue, an intergenerational dialogue, where young and old come together and talk about their vision for their community and how they can make it an age-friendly community, as Gail is talking about. And then the example I'm going to talk about the most today is Under One Roof, where programs either take place together or where people actually live together. And you may think that many of these have been impacted by the current pandemic, and you're right. But what we've been able to see are people who have done an amazing job of pivoting, of figuring out how to make these programs and relationships work, because they are so beneficial to young and to old. What's important is that there are benefits for young and for old. Everybody takes a bite, everybody receives. For children, the benefits are oftentimes in the personal and social skills. Young children who are around older adults learn those soft skills that they need throughout life. What's also wonderful is that their perception of older adults and people with disabilities changes. They really don't see the wheelchair, they don't see the walker, they don't see the wrinkles. They see somebody who's 70 that could be their friend as much as someone who's 7 that could be their friend. Young people who have the guidance and support of older adults do better academically, and it also supports the parents, especially when you think about these times of COVID, when people are homeschooling, when people need a break from each other, whether it's over Zoom, whatever, where older adults can help support families. For older adults, there are benefits as well. Older adults report an enhanced sense of well-being, better health, they take better care of themselves, they're more optimistic, they're more likely to have a larger social network. They look at life as having purpose and as being needed. They also talk about using canes less and also have a tendency to burn a few more calories because they're more active, they're more engaged. And I did want to mention to you, I love this photograph because the gentleman in the middle is Tom Taylor. And Tom was a wonderful, wonderful child advocate here in DC for many, many years, and actually built the first, or was responsible for the first child care center in a federal office building. Tom came out of retirement at age 80 and came to work for us at Generations United to advocate for children till he decided to retire again at 85. But I love what one shared site director said when she said, what's wonderful in the programs is that they rise to meet the expectation of the other. Meaning a child may be acting out, an older adult may be a little bit lethargic. When you put them together, they rise to meet the expectation of the other and are much more engaged and responsive. What we also know from our public polling around the country is that people want this type of opportunity. They really believe that it's a good use of resource, that we save dollars while making sense when we use facilities and programs to connect generations. We also find that about 3/4 of Americans think that by separating generations, we're really preventing older and younger people from sharing their gifts, from sharing what they have to offer with each other. And when it comes to care, we know that people, when they think about what kind of care they want or for themselves or for a loved one, they like the idea, they want the opportunity to have a care setting where older and younger people can interact. Care settings where there's an opportunity for people to engage in planned activities as well as those that happen spontaneously. Now, today I'm going to talk a little bit about grandparents raising grandchildren. Now there are about 2.7 million children that report living in households, or I guess they're adults report. They live in households that are known as grandfamilies or kinship families, where it's headed by a grandparent or another relative. And in DC, it's about 15% of the children who are reported to live with a relative who is head of the household. This is a positive because children thrive when they're in the care of relatives. And if you want more information about grandfamilies or kinship care families, I'd encourage you to go to one of our websites, grandfamilies.org, which has a number of resources available on it. But today I want to talk a little bit about grandfamily housing, which we've seen develop around the country. This is Pemberton Park, which is in Kansas City. The first was in the Bronx, or the first that was built from the ground up was in the Bronx. It's been around for quite some time, and it's really paved the way for others, including Plaza West, to learn from what worked and what didn't work as they were building and as they've been servicing their families. Plaza West is a wonderful example. We love the fact that it's here in DC. We applaud the mayor. We applaud the people who are visionary, Bible Way Church and others who said, we can form a unique partnership and we can make this happen because it's the right thing to do for our families. So in Plaza West, there are 50 units that are set aside for grandfamilies. What's important and special is that they provide supportive services on site. Everything is there, so the families don't have to try to get around in order to access all of the services. There's flexibility as the family ages, because this is one thing that's been learned, is that if a grandparent moves in with children into an apartment, that family is going to continue to age. And as the children age and perhaps age out of the family as they move on with their lives, it's important for the older caregiver to not be dislocated. So with Plaza West, there's senior housing on site that makes an easy transition for those caregivers. And I think one thing that's wonderful too has been to see the community support that there is for Plaza West. So I wanted to share a very brief NBC4 news clip with you. Sorry, now I'm having trouble getting rid of the video. Let me see what I can do. I understand that the video, let's see if we can go again. I understand that the volume was not there, and I apologize for that. Basically, what it was is it's a video that, let's see if we can get normal. There, sorry about that. The video was about food delivery at Plaza West. And what I think it illustrates, it's so important, is we've all heard about NIMBY, not in my backyard, and people not wanting families who might not be like themselves in the same area. And what is wonderful about Plaza West was that the Mount Vernon Triangle Business District embraced having the Grand Families Apartments there. And they've been very engaged in ways that they've been trying to support the families as they've been transitioning. And the families have been thrilled to be in the neighborhood because they're in the middle of a thriving area where they have access to stores, to shopping, to be able to get their groceries, things like that. And for the business district and the neighborhood residents to come out and show their support during the pandemic has been really phenomenal. So we were grateful that NBC4 covered that. And you can Google it if you would like to hear the volume. It really is a lovely story, and I'm sorry that you weren't able to hear it this time. So I wanted to move on and talk about one of the things at Generations United that we do is we issue our annual State of Grand Families report. And a place called Home, which we released last year, was all about affordable housing for grand families, for children and for older adults and the caregivers. And it does highlight and illustrate Plaza West here in DC. It shines a spotlight because we think it's such an excellent program. Now, the 2020 report will be actually being released in a virtual event on September 29th. And the focus of that report is on COVID and how the families are coping and what can be done to support the families during this pandemic. So if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to go to our website to sign up for the release event or to receive a copy or a link to the report once it's released on the 29th. I briefly wanted to share a couple of other intergenerational shared site models as well. I think I've got just a couple more minutes to do that. I love this picture, by the way. This is taken at an intergenerational shared site where there's childcare at an assisted living facility. And when it came to be Halloween, this young man, when his parents said, "What would you like to be for Halloween?" He said, "Well, I want to be a grand friend, because what would be more wonderful than to be a grand friend?" So they helped him dress up so that he could look like people who he spends his days with. And he was the hit at the facility. But it would never occur to him that some people might think this was someone in need or someone he wouldn't want to interact with. To him, they were his friends. So when it comes to intergenerational shared sites in space, one is outdoors. Whenever we think about a park, a playground, an outdoor space, to design it so it can be enjoyed by people of all ages. This is San Pasqual Academy in San Diego. This was a former university that had faculty housing around it. It was in a fairly remote area in San Diego County. The county took it over, and it's now home to young people in foster care who've not had successful placements with an individual family, but are in a group care. And they then invited older adults to live in the home surrounding the school and be engaged in the young people's lives. They get reduced or free rent, and all they have to do is care about the kids and be involved, and they definitely are. And I think the example here in DC that MiCasa has piloted is really a national example, a variation on this that is just really fabulous. There's also preschools or kindergarten classrooms that are run by school districts in nursing homes or care facilities. This is one in Kansas. This is Seniors on Broadway. This is a senior housing development that was built on the grounds of a playground, of a grade school, of an elementary school, and they have an intergenerational bridge that connects the two facilities. And then another intergenerational shared site model that we've looked a lot at has to do with intergenerational home sharing. And we have been convening a national collaborative of people interested in intergenerational home sharing quarterly for several years as we've been developing and learning about the models around the country. With COVID, those have gone on the back burner, but the interest is still great, and that collaboration continues to be very active. So it's as Mr. Rogers said, whether we're a preschooler or a young teen, a graduating college senior or a retired person, we human beings all want to know that we're acceptable, that our being alive somehow makes a difference in the lives of others, whether it's us, whether it's others. So I'd encourage you to join the movement, sign up for our weekly newsletter, Generations This Week. That's how you can stay up on news in the field from around the country and around the world. Participate in social media, attend our virtual Intergenerational Global Conference in the summer of 2021. And also remember grandfamilies.org if you're interested in knowing more about grand families. Because as Albert Einstein said, remember that most people see what is and never what can be. And generations living together, working together side by side, integrating is really what can be and what strengthens our communities and our families. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Elin Zurbrigg with MiCasa, and it's a pleasure to be here on this panel discussion with two of my favorite organizations. We have the good fortune of doing work with AgeFriendly DC and Generations United, and we're big fans of these organizations. I work with MiCasa Inc. We are a community-based nonprofit affordable housing developer based in DC. We've been around for almost 30 years. We're a modest size but growing organization that began working in the early 90s when DC was losing population, hard to believe now, to facilitate first-time home ownership for low-income households who might have trouble getting mortgages or finding their first affordable home. And we started out focusing on single-family home ownership, and over the years we've expanded to cooperative ownership and then rental housing, creating affordable homes for more than 2,000 people, the majority of whom are first-generation African-American and Latino homeowners. So I'm here obviously to talk about the Genesis Intergenerational Program, which is a unique program for both MiCasa and for DC, and in some ways we think around the country. MiCasa founded Genesis in 2015, and this was through a very intensive and I think one of the best collaborations, public, private, and nonprofit collaborations I've ever been a part of in 20 years of doing community-based work. It was a partnership between the Child and Family Services Agency with its Office of Youth Empowerment, the DC Department of Aging and Community Living, with guidance from Generations of Hope. And if you look up Generations of Hope, they're an amazing resource for intergenerational communities throughout the country. So CFSA DC initiated the idea for the program, engaging Generations of Hope as an advisor and selecting MiCasa as a developer to build the first program of its kind in DC that houses 3 generations. So young mothers aging out of foster care and their children, of course, and low-income seniors, combined with other families not affiliated with foster care, who are willing to commit volunteering time in their community. And the program's essential purpose was and remains to provide conditions for a strong sense of community to flourish, meaningful connections, and mutual support across the generations. Program staff facilitate community engagement and link residents to outside services. So unlike Plaza West, We don't have on-site services. Many of the young women who have left foster care come with outside connections to services, and many of our seniors are very connected with senior centers and other forms of support that they find outside of the building. But it's the community base that's the basis for support for the residents living at Genesis. And the long-term goals of the program are really to counteract the social isolation often experienced by low-income seniors and families, and generational economic and housing instability. So how did we fund it? Genesis was made possible through key funding and support. First, low-cost loans from the DC Department of Housing and Community Development, another public partner in the project, that funded the ground-up, fully accessible solar-powered building, and to build out 2,000 square feet of community space, including large indoor meeting space, library and computer room, small fitness center, and outdoor recreation areas, and a garden. Second, critical multi-year startup operating funding from CFSA, enabling the program to establish itself in its first years. And I'll say more about that. And third, a contract with the DC Housing Authority that provides the essential rental assistance payments to allow residents to pay 1/3 of their income on rent and to keep the building truly affordable over the years. As I mentioned, the program was formed from a groundwork of strong interagency, public, and nonprofit partnerships. The program design process lasted well over a year while the building was being built. And with guidance from Generations of Hope, lending experience gained from established intergenerational community programs around the country, in particular a founding program called Hope Meadows in Rantoul, Illinois, that some of you may know about, leadership from CFSA, and the participation of policy experts from the Center for the Study of Social Policy and Leading Age. So we had wonderful partnerships and lots of good leadership in the beginning of the program and the establishing of the program. So how does it work? The essential model for Genesis is one that promotes the idea of community and social connectedness and active participation through what we call good neighboring. This in turn supports child development, families' sense of safety and security, and reduced isolation through building strong and really anticipated long-term relationships. So Genesis is anticipated to be permanent housing. People do move on from time to time, but they can remain in place as long as they wish to. So this also provides security for many seniors who are aging in place, and many of whom do not have close families. So they have this sense as they age in place that they will not be alone. There are other examples that Donna shared of intergenerational communities in DC, Plaza West, and in other parts of the country, and certainly in the world. Genesis is one of the few that we know of to house young mothers who have aged out of the foster care system. So just an overview of who lives at Genesis. There are 27 households, the majority of which are made up of people of color, African American, African immigrants, and Latino immigrants. The majority of households are women-headed. And for young mothers who have aged out, children's ages range from about 2 years old to 11. For other families, the range is between 5 years old and high school age. And in a few cases, we have older children who are in college and return home in the summertime and are actually really great participants in the community. On average, seniors are on the younger side. So I would say, entering the program in their earlier mid-60s. And we do have our eldest, everybody's grandmother, who's aged 92. Before Genesis opened, the resident selection process lasted more than 5 or 6 months of outreach, referrals, reference checks, and multiple in-depth interviews by committee. I think many of the residents felt they'd never been through such an intensive process, but to hear from them describe the ways in which they would actively participate in the community. So the essential program objectives are community building, resident capacity building, and leadership development. And then a fourth goal, if you will, is program sustainability and just the challenge of maintaining operating funding year after year. So the community commitment is the essential part of good neighboring, which is the participation that residents provide to one another in formal and informal ways. So many ways to participate. People sign up for an ongoing task or event, or people commit to spending time with one another in more informal ways. When we opened up Genesis initially, we based the community participation model on Generations of Hope, which was much more of an hours-based community participation model. And then after discussions with the community who felt like the system was too rigid and didn't capture all the little things that happened organically between neighbors, the staff and the residents worked to redesign the program in 2019. And the result was the Good Neighboring Initiative, which tracks participation not by hours, but by tasks. And that's, again, how people sign up and report monthly on the ways in which they're supporting each other. So 3 kinds of support. In general, one-on-one support is given, like a neighbor gives another neighbor a ride to work or picks up groceries. These things are more and more important during COVID-19, and they're happening actually more frequently, I would say, during COVID-19 because of the need. Reading to or spending time with a child or helping with homework, or even older adults spending time with a mom who's working on a resume or needs to write something to apply for a job. And then there's general community support, like organizing the library or the community room, designing or disseminating flyers, working on a newsletter. And we have one resident who every night goes to check and make sure that all the doors are locked so everyone feels secure. You can count on her for that. And then the other way to be involved is organizing a class or a one-time event. Things like we've had elders teach Spanish classes, organize a garden club, being part of organizing a third Tuesday dinner or an open mic night. These are just some examples of resident-led activities. We've also had third-party organizations participate in programming, such as arts organizations. So elders and young people come together for shared experiences through intergenerational arts and music programming, which also serves to expose children to arts programming that they might be missing in school. And then some specific on-request learning sessions, such as we had a cohort of called Pathways to Homeownership last fall for interested first-time homeowners. One of the challenges right now, obviously, is the need for social distance for public health and safety. And the Genesis program is developing a new plan to focus more heavily on supporting resident leadership and resident-led programming with a focus on small-scale connections between neighbors rather than large gatherings. And we've worked hard to try to make sure that people are connected in different ways. One of the best things that happened this summer was we had a gardening program that initiated and was held mostly out of doors, so people felt comfortable social distancing. But there have been many challenges in terms of getting people online for events and online to connect with one another. Some things do continue to happen between individual neighbors, but not as much, obviously, in groups during COVID-19. And I think one of our greatest challenges has been capturing outcomes long-term. We're a relatively new program. It's 5 years old. Fortunately, we did plan early to begin collecting data from residents through in-depth entrance surveys and annual surveys to track outcomes. So some of the outcomes we've tracked are people's sense of connection with their neighbors. One of the most important things, happy to report that everyone surveyed said that they have a good connection with their neighbors. The majority said that they have one or more strong friendships with neighbors. And all residents report feeling safe in their home, which is up from around 80% when people entered the program. Young mothers are all pursuing education or have stable employment, and all families exiting the foster care system have remained intact. And more intangible, difficult to capture data, the children in the community are really thriving. And this is observed by the sense of security and confidence they convey, their easy connection with elders who, under normal circumstances, would reach out to envelop them in a big hug as they tumble into the community room after school, or sit next to them during quilt making, or help them to learn to sew, or play a game during community dinners. And I just want to end on saying that one of the biggest challenges the program still faces, being both relatively new and non-traditional, is sustained funding. CFSA continues to support the program, but it's limited by its own funding restrictions. And while we found there's a lot of interest in the program, many established funders will only commit for a single year or in small increments. So we're once again in the process of retooling the program, changing staff, and adapting to social distancing and better facilitating community-led programming. We remain hopeful because we've observed that the real power lies in the hands of the residents themselves, the young mothers, their children, and the seniors who've built strong relationships and a strong sense of caring across the generations, and continue to demonstrate resilience and initiative even as they strive to survive and thrive in their own lives. If you want to find out more information on Genesis, here are some of the websites and highlights, and links to our website as well, MiCasa-Inc.org. And thank you.
Hi, we have some questions. This is Gail Kohn again, wanting to respond to our audience. And we have some questions from Kirsten. How can grandparents feel supported and validated when supporting early learners, especially now with virtual classrooms as the norm?
I can take a first stab at that, and then Elin, you may have some ideas as well with the residents that you work with. But there are a few things that in terms of working with grandparents who are raising grandchildren, what we know is extremely helpful are support groups. And many support groups have gone virtual. Virtual may be as low tech as a phone call or a conference call. It could be Zooms, it can be other ways, but those support groups where they're able to talk with their peers and share how things are going, lessons learned, look for guidance and advice, is just extremely helpful. It's also, I think, really important for us. I've talked with many grandparents over the years who just say what we really need is respect for what we're doing. And I think we can all show that and show our support and appreciation, because the grandparents have made a number of sacrifices. I've never met one who said they wouldn't do it for their grandchild, but we know that they've put their own lives on hold. And so what we found is really, really helpful also is we have a network called Grand Voices, and we do have several Grand Voices here in DC. And these are people that we've worked with to tell their stories to policymakers, to city councils, to organizations, to make sure that people understand the circumstances and are keeping them in mind when they're designing policy and services. So it's really listening and engaging and valuing and affirming that I think are very helpful.
Another question: how can grandparents feel supported and validated when supporting early learners, especially now? That's the question I just put before you. How do you make sure that adult caregivers are all on the same page with expectations for kids? Great question.
Well, in terms of adult caregivers, when they're not on the same page, I think this gets into something that we're seeing in particular in the area during this era of COVID and the pandemic. And that is that Pew reported that over 50% of the adults that moved as a result of COVID have moved back in with family members. So we're seeing a tremendous increase in multi-generational households. Now, those are different than skip generation households or grand family households. Those are households that generally have 3 or more generations in them. And oftentimes what we always recommend is communication is essential. If it's at all possible, you know you're going to be living together, what you need to do is sit down and be very clear about expectations. And one of those expectations is how the children are going to be raised and who's going to be the lead in that. It's also an important conversation when an older relative is providing childcare. Now, there is a role that grandparents often play. One of my favorite quotes was from Marion Robinson, who was Michelle Obama's mother and moved into the White House with them, which helped the Obamas to be able to really perform their duties, knowing they had that backup for their daughters. But she was the first one to say that she could discipline the girls, but she would also be the first one to give them ice cream. So there are things that grandparents are going to do, and it's coming up with what you can all live with.
Here's one for you, Elin. What are the requirements that senior citizens must meet to qualify for acceptance in grand families and Genesis? Are there age and health requirements?
That's a great question. So most important, most essential was their ability to articulate in their application, and particularly in in-person interviews, how they would specifically engage with community members, what they hope to bring, why they hope to be part of a community. And some experience, it doesn't have to be formal experience. For many people, it was, growing up in Nigeria and having an experience there where they organically had a sense of community with elders, and, organically, their families expected them to volunteer in the community and be part of the community. Or someone who grew up in DC, who was a community leader, and really enjoyed that sense of volunteerism. So just in some way able to articulate strongly and with heart how you would participate in the community. There are not age or any other criteria, health criteria, certainly for participating in the program. We have, had people enter the program, seniors who, had physical constraints, and we're able to work with them with support from usually an aid worker or a visiting nurse. We are a little limited in terms of, even though the building is fully accessible, there is not on-site nursing, and so we have had two elder residents leave when they determined that they were at a point where they needed more support, and they moved to one to an assisted living facility and the other to a community that had built-in health care services. And so that does sometimes happen. But the wonderful thing is that the community worked with them on this transition and, gave them a send-off, and there still is connection. They will come back and visit the community, and there still is connection with the relationships that they built. So.
And now back to you, Donna. Here's a question: how do you transition from grandparent care to early education preschool?
Interesting question. I'm not quite sure if the questioner is talking about. Grandparents are stepping up. They're providing childcare, oftentimes at risk to themselves during this time of COVID, because childcare has been difficult to access. And as schools are reopening, in some areas, they are transitioning back to other care. If a grandparent is raising a child, they have, and they are responsible for that child, they have the access and ability to access education for their grandchild and to access their individual education plan. And so it's really important that they know when the child is transitioning from their home to school, that they have the rights that parents have in terms of talking to teachers, accessing the supports and services that their child needs. So I did want to mention one other thing. since Elin mentioned a gentleman from Nigeria at Genesis, I had the good fortune when Genesis first opened to go up, and everyone was so gracious and generous and let us shoot a video there that we were involved with at the time. And one of the video clips that we got that looks different than it actually was when an older gentleman, who I believe is the gentleman from Nigeria, who was incredibly charming, was with a teenager in the computer lab. And on video, it looks like the teenager is teaching him how to use something on the computer, when in fact he was educating the teenager about a new program he had just been learning. And I thought it was such a wonderful example of that reciprocity between generations, and that people at every age have something to give and are gifts. So I just wanted to add that.
That's great. I want to add this question because it's a transition back to the opportunity we have, because we have some time, to see the NBC4 strip again, the piece that you presented earlier in which we couldn't hear. The question is, how can the general community support our elder population, especially those raising grandchildren? And I would take this not only with Plaza West and where people are together, but across the city, because we have people living throughout the community who are raising grandchildren in homes. And you point out, both of you, that there are people living with multi-generational families. So I think this question is an important one. How can one provide support to those individuals as they community support, as they provide parenting?
Well, I do think that one of the things I like about the video that I do hope you're able to see is that it shows community involvement. Sometimes it's something very, very simple. If you grow extra vegetables, you deliver those. You check in. You'd make a phone call. You find out, do you need somebody to pick up your prescription? Especially when the pandemic began, the grandparents, many of the grandparents we spoke with were simply terrified, because they knew if they got sick, their children would go into the foster care system. They'd lose those children because they don't have a backup plan. So in fact, anything that people can do to make it easier. I think one of the stories that always stood out to me too was an older grandfather who was helping. He and his wife were raising their two grandchildren, and it was time for one of the grandchildren to take the training wheels off the bicycle, off the little tricycle he had been learning on. And he said it was one thing when I was younger and I was a father to be able to push that bike along without the training wheels till he could balance. But now it's really hard. And so the role that Big Brothers, Big Sisters, that Boys and Girls Clubs, that mentors, that sororities, fraternities, people of all age can play so that the children have an opportunity to run and play sports and do things they might not be able to, and give the grandparents respite is also really important. But I think the other part of this question, and I think Gail and Elin in the work that and the passion they have for the work that they do share this, which is oftentimes it's the older adults who are the givers of care, who are the givers of support. And so we can think about supporting older adults, which we need to do. But let's also think about how we engage older adults in supporting families, in supporting the residents, the young women and residents at Genesis, at other facilities, because older adults have so much to give, so much to contribute. Let's make sure that we're not making them or letting them sit on the sidelines. We need them.
So here's our final question, and then we'll watch the video again. Are there mental health benefits for grandparents when they live in multi-generational homes? The questioner says, I love the idea it takes a village to raise a child, but I think there are benefits to the whole village. Certainly a good comment. And we all agree on that one on this panel, no question about it. One comment before one of you takes on the mental health issue of how that support is provided. We know that it was great fun having the fire department come to Genesis, who are nearby and didn't realize Genesis was there, and got to know the community as a result of that. And I hope that relationship continued after we were there together.
I'm glad you brought that up, Gail, because that was a wonderful connection that AgeFriendly DC helped to establish. The fire department has a new building right almost directly across the street from Genesis. Genesis is located also near the newly developing Walter Reed development. So it's not as central as Plaza West, but, walking distance to the Tacoma Metro. And there are connections that we've been able to make with local schools, for example, and the fire department that I think are really wonderful, and hope to nurture those going forward. And one example of, it takes a village, and for senior support, I think is very important. We have an elder who's one of the more fragile elders in the community, who is very private. And I think, people try to look in on her, but they're also very respectful of our privacy. But, at one point recently, she was struggling a bit, and she had her smoke detector go off. It was nothing serious. It was just she left something on and she wasn't feeling well. She was in the other room. And it was amazing how the community came together and rallied around her. The fire department came, they were all there, but it was community members who came and supported her, brought her a chair, brought her a glass of water. She was sitting outside, and the fire department was checking her apartment. And, actually people communicated with me these wonderful pictures of people just surrounding her with care and with concern. And so, I think definitely those connections, the sense that you're not alone, the sense that, people will look after you when something like that happens, is an invaluable sense of security and wonderful sense of, that I'm somewhere that I not only give, but I'm receiving on a regular basis from the village. And I do think that is exactly right, that the whole village benefits, that people feel good, that they're able to contribute and support one another, and respect one another, and really learn to love one another.
So I think we should take the time now to go ahead and watch the video again. I really am looking forward to it. Thank you so much for allowing us to do this presentation. I hope those who are watching have other questions that they will certainly bring to the attention of both Elin and Donna and me. We're all interested in hearing from you. So let's watch the video again.
Many of us take for granted the ability to be able to just head to the grocery store. Not all seniors can do that right now. That's why a DC organization is stepping up to help some grandparents caring for their grandchildren. They're the ones getting the food so that they're not exposed during this pandemic. A helping hand for a special group of seniors in Northwest DC.
We saw a tremendous need here at Plaza West, given the unique population that lives here.
We should give this up because I think it's an opportunity for us to
it's home to dozens
hear
of grand
from Donna about the mental health support. I know from speaking with people at Plaza West that the grandparents who live there with their children have either lost their own children and have taken over because they've died, or they are incapacitated by some very challenging event, or they're in jail. And those individuals need to work through some of those feelings that they have that thrust upon them, I'll say it that way, just to spin it, being the parent again.
I think Elin addressed the mental health aspect of multi-generational families really, really well in terms of the benefits. Gail, when we think about Plaza West, in particular, in grand families, you're right. Grandparents do well raising grandchildren. The children do thrive, but only if they're supported, because the grandparents are dealing with loss. The children are dealing with loss. The children are more likely to have special needs, both physical and emotional. And the grandparents are really grieving the loss of what they thought their later years might be. So it's really important to provide respite, to provide mental health services. But what you'll also hear from grandparents, as Elin was describing, is that sense of purpose. I need to get out of bed. I need to take better care of myself because I want a better life for my grandchild. And in a multi-generational family, there are incredible benefits because, one, the middle generation doesn't have to worry about their parents being secluded and socially isolated, especially during a time of COVID. And they have that extra pair of hands, extra set of wheels to help with the children. And the children have a sense of roots. It's a win-win-win. And as a society, we need to stop thinking of a multi-generational family as a deficit model, as a sad situation, when in fact it can be incredibly strong and incredibly helpful for our families and our communities. So thank you.
Very, very fun working with you. I always enjoy seeing you and hearing what you have to say. We all learn from one another, and it's a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the Thrive by Five conference. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn. Goodbye.